In this tutorial, we will have a look how we can make this amazing camera switch. So we're gonna take a look on it. And before I jump into the coding part, I want to thank Step Gamers, Wiriya Charoenying. I really apologize if I pronouncing your name badly. I really apologize for that. And thanks to Kevin Cooker, and a special thanks to Sanesh Kethmin for purchasing source code of the game from my Patreon page. And if you guys want to do that, then you can do it on my Patreon page, and by that you will unlock many benefits. We need to install Cinemachine, and in order to install Cinemachine, we need to go to window in the top bar. You can notice, then click on this package manager, and in the left side you can see in project, then Unity registry, my assets built in. So select this Unity registry in the left bar, select that and search right over here Cinemachine. And if you're not able to get that, then simply type right over here Cinemachine and it's gonna pop up. Then select your Cinemachine and you're gonna see a install button in the right section right over here. So just click on that install and it's gonna import Cinemachine in your project. So I already done it. As you can see, I don't have the install button right now because I already installed it. So once we are done, we can cut this step. And now we need to create our Cinemachine 2D camera. To create that, we need to move over to this hierarchy, then right click or hit this plus icon, then go over to Cinemachine in the bottom, then choose targeted in the bottom, says targeted cameras, and then click on this 2D camera. And as soon as you're gonna click on it, it's gonna create the Cinemachine camera as you can see. And what we need to do, we want to follow our player. So that's why if we move over to Cinemachine, select this Cinemachine camera game object in the hierarchy, then move over to inspector tab. In Cinemachine camera component, we can see tracking target and it says done transform. So we want to follow our player game object. So that's why inside this tracking target slot, we need to drag our player game object. So we will select our player in the hierarchy, then drag it over to that field. And as soon as we drag it, we can see, and if we just go ahead and then click on this play button in the top in order to play our game, you will able to notice that our main camera just gonna follow our player game object in the direction player is going. So let me show you. So just wait a moment and we're gonna create the camera switch. So just wait for that, and we can notice indeed our main camera is following our player game object as you can see. So this seems fine. So let's get out of play mode. And to create two cameras, basically we just want to create two cameras. One camera just gonna be over here and we can define the size of it, and the second camera gonna be over here and we can also need to define basically we also need to define the size of it. So what we need to do, we firstly need to create an empty game object, but before we do, we need to do one settings. Basically select your Cinemachine camera in the hierarchy, then go over to inspector Cinemachine camera component, and in the bottom you can see add extension. So just click on it and then choose this Cinemachine Confiner 2D. So make sure you choose this one. And now over here, if we scroll down, we can see we need to bounding shape. Basically we need to drag over here a polygon collider 2D. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna create an empty game object first, and then we're gonna make this Cinemachine camera child of that game object. So let me show you how we can do that. So firstly we're gonna create an empty game object. To do it, let's move over to hierarchy, right click or hit this plus icon. Let's create an empty game object, and we can call this game object to something like cam1 or camera1. Simply you can say cam underscore 1, and let's select the move tool and we're gonna move it somewhere around here like this. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna attach a polygon collider 2D in basically inside basically we're gonna attach a polygon collider 2D component to our cam underscore 1 game object. But before we do, we're gonna select our Cinemachine camera and we're gonna make it child
of this cam underscore one game object. So now if I select my cam underscore one and try to move it, our Cinemachine camera just gonna move with it. It's not moving because we basically need to move our player game object. So make sure you make the Cinemachine camera child of that game object. Firstly, create an empty game object first, then select your Cinemachine camera and drag it top of that game object into in your hierarchy tab. So it's gonna be child. And now what we need to do, we need to attach a component to our cam underscore one, basically the parent game object, not with the child one. Basically, don't do it inside this Cinemachine camera. Select your parent, then go over to inspector, click on add component, and we need to add a component which is a polygon collider 2D. So we're gonna attach that, which is polygon collider 2D. So we're gonna type that, and as soon as we type, it just pop up. So let's click on it in order to attach, and we need to make the size, and make sure you go over to polygon collider 2D and set this is triggered to true. Basically check, so it's not gonna register our player to easily pass through it. So that's why. So make sure you just take this is trigger inside your polygon collider 2D component, and we need to make the size of something like this much. So let's click on this edit collider, and we're gonna edit the collider as the size the camera we want, something like this much. And you can just adjust, and it's basically up to you how you want to do it, something like this. And this seems perfect. Perfect. And so I want the size something like this much. I guess we're gonna drag it over here a little bit to the right direction, and this seems pretty much great. And once we are satisfied, then we can just drag. So now what we need to do, you can just play around, and you can just make that how much you want the camera to be inside of this player game object, basically how much you just want to capture in this area. Then you can just make that, and after doing that, make sure you select your Cinemachine camera, basically the child one, and select your the parent one. Since the polygon collider 2D we attach to the parent one, so that's why we're gonna select our parent one, and let's drag it over to this bounding shape 2D underneath our Cinemachine Confiner 2D component. So make sure you just drag it there, and you can play around with oversized window. So just check that and just play around with this. So I'm gonna make it something around 10. So check this oversized window and then do it, and now this seems pretty much fine. And once we are satisfied, and I'm gonna call this one, instead of calling cam underscore one, I'm gonna call it camera underscore one, since I want to make it prefab, and I already have a name of this game object as same name. So that's why I just want to replace with another name. So I'm gonna call it camera underscore one, and I'm gonna select my Cinemachine camera, and I'm gonna call this one vcam, or Cinemachine virtual camera, or let's call it cam as a vcam. Let's call it vcam or cam v. So let's call it cam underscore v, or you can simply say camera or Cinemachine virtual camera. And now if we go ahead and then click on this play button in the top in order to play our game, you will able to notice our camera just gonna be just gonna follow our player once it's inside of this camera underscore one game object, as we resize it our polygon collider 2D. And once we surpass this area, then our camera not gonna follow at all, as you can notice. So once it's inside, then it's doing, and once we are out, then it's not doing at all. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna get out of play mode, and we will duplicate this camera underscore one to create our camera 2, and we're gonna move it somewhere over here. So the size gonna be something like this much, and it's gonna capture these things. So we will select our camera underscore one, and let's press down Control D to duplicate, and let's move the duplicate one something over here. But we need to select the first camera ends over here, so I'm gonna select the second camera, and I'm gonna move it over here since our first camera is ending over here. So that's why. and we will call this one camera underscore 2 instead of calling camera underscore 1. So I'm going to call it a camera underscore 2, and this seems pretty much fine. And make sure you select your child game object, then go over to inspector as animation confiner 2D component and select your camera underscore 2 and drag it there. And I don't want this camera underscore 2, basically the second camera, as the starting camera, or I don't want to be activate. So I'm gonna select my second camera, and let's select the Cinemachine camera game object or the cam underscore b, and we want to disable, and we're gonna enable once our player game object just gonna trigger with this. So that's why so what we can do, we can attach a script. So let's create a script in order to basically set that. But before I set, I'm going to select my second camera, then I'm going to choose my Cinemachine camera or the cam underscore b, then go over to inspector, and I'm going to uncheck. Basically we just disabling that, and we want to enable that camera, that Cinemachine camera, once we're going to trigger with that polygon collider 2D as we created. So now let's create a script for it. For that we can just move over to our project tab, assets, and then script folder, right click, then create mono behavior script, and you can name that script to something like Cinemachine you can name it to something like camera switch. It's basically up to you. I already created a script called camera switch. So if I move over to my script folder, if I move over to my scripts folder, I have it over here, camera switch, as you can see. So I'm gonna select camera underscore 2 as well as camera underscore camera underscore 1 and the 2 in the hierarchy, and I'm gonna select my camera switch script from that folder and drag it over to this add component section in the inspector. Make sure you attach to the parent game object, not with the Cinemachine camera or the child game object, because we're gonna do the scripting inside this Cinemachine camera. So let me show you what we basically doing. So this is our second camera. So let's click on this play button in the top to play our game, and we should see once we're gonna trigger with that polygon collider 2D, our player game object just gonna trigger with that. Then we want to enable the second camera, but in the start of the game, as you can see, we disable the second camera and the first camera is enabled. So now we are over here, and if we cross this line, basically player, as you can notice, it just triggering with this polygon collider 2D. So now what we need to do, we basically need to enable the second camera. So I'm gonna get out of play mode, and to enable that, if I select my second camera second game object, and then select this camera, then go over to inspector, then enable, we can notice that the second camera gets enabled. And if we uncheck, basically means disable, the second camera just gets deactivate. Now we're gonna open up our script. So let's open up camera switch, and make sure you attach this camera switch script to both of your game object. And before we do, select your player game object in the hierarchy, then go over to inspector tag, and it's gonna be untagged. So make sure you just assign with player tag, so the polygon collider 2D will know this is our player game object. So make sure you just do it. And once we done, as you can see, by default we have the start and update function. So what we will do, we just gonna remove all of these things, and we need a reference to our Cinemachine camera, basically the child game object. We need a reference of it, then we can just activate or deactivate. So basically we need a reference of the Cinemachine camera, or basically the child game object, and this Cinemachine camera is itself a whole game object. So that's why we need to type the game object. So we will go to our class, and we will create a public game object, and we can call this one cam, or short for camera, or we can simply call it vcam, virtual camera as well. And now what we need, we're gonna use on trigger enter 2D as well as on trigger exit 2D function. So once we're gonna trigger with the second camera, so if I select my second camera or the second game object, so once we're gonna collide with this polygon collider 2D, collide or trigger with this, then I just want to activate the second camera. And if we just trigger out from the second camera, basically if I select the first game object and if I trigger out, basically if I leave the collider 2D of the first camera, then I want to disable the first virtual camera or the basically the child game object. So that is the thing. So that's why we created this game object right over here to get the reference of our cameras. So we will use this on trigger enter 2D function, and this function get called when we trigger with something. So if we just trigger with our player game object, so if we trigger with this player game object, then I want to enable the camera of this game object. So if I select my camera underscore one game object, so as you can see in the start of the game, we just gonna trigger with this player game object, because this player game object inside this polygon collider 2D, and we just check that is trigger as you can notice in the inspector. So that's why I want this camera to be enabled. But when we leave the collider 2D, basically the polygon collider 2D, then I'm gonna set the this Cinemachine camera, basically the child one, at disable. So basically that is the thing. So now let's move over to our script, and over here we're gonna check. So we will use this if condition. Let's make first bracket and some curly brackets. And what we're gonna do over here, we have the collision parameter as you can notice right over here. And this collision parameter, by this collision parameter we can extract information what we triggered with. We can extract anything like that. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna use this collision parameter. So we will type collision dot game object, and collision dot game object basically means the game object we trigger it with, and the script is attached to this camera underscore one, and then and also it's attached to this camera underscore two. So if our camera just trigger with this player game object, then we want this camera to be enabled. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna access the tag. So collision dot game object over here basically means the player game object that we trigger it with. So we're gonna access that tag, and we will check if the tag is equals to player. Basically means our camera just trigger it with this player game object, means our player game object is inside of this player polygon collider 2D. So now what we need to do, we need to enable this camera. So that's why I'm gonna set so basically we will go to cam dot game object dot set active, and make this first bracket and then close that up with semicolon. So cam dot game object basically means you can simply say Cinemachine virtual camera, and we're using cam dot game object means Cinemachine camera, and we're using this set active function in order to activate. So we are triggering with our player, basically means our player is inside this polygon collider 2D, means we need to activate. So that's why inside this set active function we're gonna set it to true. True basically means we just activating. And also I want in the start of the game I want to disable the first camera as well as the second camera. So that's why I'm gonna select the first camera, basically Cinemachine camera underscore one, and I'm gonna choose the cam underscore v, means the Cinemachine camera, and then I'm gonna move over to inspector, then I'm gonna uncheck, basically we just disabling. But once our player game object just gonna trigger with our polygon collider 2D, then what we doing, we just setting activate as you can notice. And this script is attached to our Cinemachine camera underscore one game object. So we're gonna press down Ctrl S to save our script, and let's move over to Unity editor. So now it's done, and if I select my Cinemachine and Cinemachine underscore one game object, then go over to inspector, as you can see it says cam and it says none. So what we need to do, we need to drag our cam underscore v into that slot. Basically we just taking our Cinemachine camera and then dragging over here, and we need to do the same thing with our Cinemachine underscore 2 game object. So I'm gonna select that, and let's select our cam underscore v, and let's drag it over to that slot. So now we have both of this reference, basically the first Cinemachine camera as well as the second one. So we have both of this, and now if I just go ahead, and as you can see I just disabled the first camera as well as the second camera. But once we're gonna start our game, basically click on this play button in the top to play our game. And as soon as our camera underscore one, basically the parent game object just gonna trigger with this player game object, you will able to notice the first camera just gonna activate. And indeed, as you can see, as soon as our game start and then move over to hierarchy, we can see cam underscore v just gets activate, and the cam underscore v in our second game object is disabled because as default we just disable it. And now what we need to do, once we're gonna trigger out, basically once we're gonna get out with the first game area, basically this area, then we just want to disable this camera. Then we want to disable that camera. To do that, let's get out of play mode. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna move over to script one more time, and for that we're gonna use on trigger exit 2d. So we're gonna use this on trigger exit 2d function, and this function get called private on trigger exit 2d. So this function get called when we gonna trigger out. So once we're gonna trigger out with this a polygon collider 2d, then this function just gonna activate. So once we're gonna leave our polygon collider 2d on, once we're gonna trigger out, then I want to disable the camera and I want to enable the first camera. And indeed with enabling our camera, but once we're gonna leave the collider, then we're gonna disable our camera. For that we're gonna use the same thing, which is if condition. Let's make first bracket and some curly brackets, and we're gonna use this collision to check that. So we will type collision dot game object, and now we're gonna access the tag of it, and we will check if the tag is equals to player. Basically means the game object that we trigger out or a trigger out from this polygon collider 2d, if it's player, then that means we need to disable this camera. So we need to disable that, and in order to disable that, we basically need to move over to cam, basically this cam underscore v underneath our camera underscore one game object in the hierarchy. So we need to disable that, and in order to disable, we need to use this cam dot game object dot set active function, and in brackets if you pass false, it basically means you just disabling it, but if you pass true, then you it's basically means you just enabling that. Since we want to disable, so I'm gonna set to false, and let's close that up with semicolon, and we're gonna press down Ctrl S to save our script, and let's move over to Unity editor. And you will able to notice that as soon as we're gonna leave the first camera, or we're gonna leave that polygon collider 2d, you will able to notice that a camera just gonna get deactivate, or it's gonna disable, and disable. And once we're gonna trigger with the second camera or that polygon collider 2d of our second camera, then it's gonna be activate. So let's click on this play button. So let's click on this play button in the top to play our game, and let's take a look on this. So as soon as we're gonna leave our polygon collider 2d, it's gonna be deactivate, and once we're gonna trigger with the second camera, then it's gonna be activate. And as you can see, as soon as our game started, we can see, or we can notice in our hierarchy, this camera underscore one game object camera underscore v gets activate. But once we leave the collider, you will see it's gonna be disabled. So just wait a moment. As you can see, indeed it's get disabled, and if I select my second game object, then this camera gets activate, as you can notice in the hierarchy. But if we leave this one as well, then it's gonna disable right away. And indeed we can notice underneath our camera underscore 2 cam underscore v, basically the Cinemachine camera gets disabled, as you can notice. But as soon as we're gonna trigger with this, it's gonna be enabled, as you can see, indeed it's doing. But once we are out, we can see it's get disabled. So I'm gonna get out of play mode, and if we move over to script, as you can see we doing over here. So once we colliding with our player game object, then we activating our Cinemachine camera. But once we trigger out or leave that polygon collider 2d, then we just setting that we just deactivating that Cinemachine camera. So I hope you get the idea that how you can do it, and I will see you in the next tutorial. So bye for now, and I will see you in the next tutorial.